Okay, I am joined by my good friend Marv, a DevOps super genius, cybersecurity genius. Been doing that kind of stuff for years and years and years. But more importantly, for this particular conversation, a donator to my Extra Life fund, and shows a game that we're going to play through and we're going to talk a little bit about. The thing that I love about this one in particular is we're discussing based pretty much solely off of what we remember about this series. I haven't played it yet. Marv said he hasn't gone and replayed these games in a very long time. And not only that, but they're like, it's an old game. So like this really is just like the nostalgia of the series for me. We'll obviously like get into some gameplay a little bit later. But we're going to talk about the Serious Sam franchise, particularly. So what have you played? You've played 1 and 2, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, 1 and 2. I think that was released in like 01, 05.
Yeah.
And the job that I had in 05, I stopped playing video games because I had no time. That killed me for gaming for several years. But I have the collection on Steam.
Yeah.
I think I have it installed and I haven't launched it because I don't know how well it's gonna like hold up to my memory.
Yeah, no, I'm curious myself because I'm in the same boat. Like I played these back in that time frame and loved them. Like I thought that they were just like really fun FPS. Like for an FPS, like they're the sweet spot for me, right? The FPS is really just about like how big can your gun get and how many enemies are you shooting? And for me, like Serious Sam was like the pinnacle of that, right? Like Duke Nukem was like, yeah, I had big guns and you had the voiceover work and some of the other stuff, but like the CroTeam, is that how you pronounce? I always said the CroTeam, but I've never known if that's right.
They're from Croatia. They're from like
yeah. But like that was like their sticking point. It's like we want to fit as many enemies on screen as possible to show off the power of this engine that they built. And like that was the fun of Serious Sam to me. It was just like onslaughts of enemies.
And I think when they published it, it was more like a proof of concept of their engine than anything. And what I think I liked the most about it is they knew it wasn't a AAA game.
Yeah, no.
And they didn't price it like a AAA game because when it originally released, it was like $19.
Yep.
In 2001, and every AAA game forever has been like $60-$70.
Yeah. Yep.
Or more now, and they knew they didn't have a real market at that AAA price, but they had quality. They had something to show.
Yeah.
And I ended up back in 01 when it first came out. I wrote a review for my friend's blog. It's long gone, I'm sure, but he used to do a series called I think it was Major Havoc or something like that. It was, and he reviewed video games. And I was talking about this one day. He was just a coworker of mine, friend. And I was talking about this game one day. I'm like, hey, you got to play this. He's like, I don't really have time, but if you want to throw something down, we'll throw it up on the site. And so I kind of dug in and I just like played through the entire game. I found the Easter egg of like a cave with all of the faces of the developers and stuff. It was really, really wild. And like I played that game a lot. Like you wouldn't think there's much replay value in a completely mindless shooter with not a lot of story, but there kind of was. Like
no, this was my blow off Steam game. Like when I needed one where I was just like, I just need to shoot some stuff. Like it was Serious Sam. Like I was loading up Serious Sam and just blowing up some aliens and other, like I don't even know, like I remember there being aliens. Like the idea is like it's like time travel and aliens, right? Or am I way off base?
Aliens in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, because I remember going back to ancient Egypt. I remember
Yeah.
aliens.
And like the thing that I remember the most, you saw that first one, the dude coming over the dunes with the two bombs in his hand,
Yes.
screaming right for you.
Yep.
And then the next thing, it's like a Japanese bullet hell game
Yeah.
with just all these things coming at you, and um, nothing ever prepared me for that. Like all the shooters that I played to date prior to that, nothing prepares you for 1,000 screaming dudes
No.
with bombs in their hands coming for you.
No. I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought of it as a bullet hell game, but it is kind of like a bullet hell. Like that honestly is a great little synopsis of like, no, like it really is like first person bullet hell. No, that's a great way to put it. I had never thought of it that way. But then as soon as you said that, I'm like, that's actually like, that's what this is. Like, that's the difference between this and like the Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem kind of thing is like, this has just way more of that. It is just, you're shooting there's a lot less strategy than like a Quake, maybe. I haven't played Quake in a really long time either, but then like say a Dead Cells or something like that, where there's like less of that kind of play, and
so
it's
many
just shooting stuff up.
FPSs become like a jump puzzles, and you have to go get your armor and these guns and save that stuff for the boss fights, and
Yeah.
just things like that where uh Serious Sam First Encounter, which I probably have 1,000 hours in, it you really didn't need to. Like, you'd run out of bullets or something like that, and you just die and then start over from your last stage.
Yep.
and it wasn't like you're really invested in it. But like a lot of the other shooters out there are really jump puzzles with games or guns rather, and Serious Sam was guns and bullet hell.
Yep.
And
no, it was just shooting, pure shooting. Yeah, that was fun. And the price point, like I love the comments on the price point too, like, because that's really that was the zone, right? And that I view this almost as that, like, it was almost like the extension of the shareware days to me, where it was like id Software is just putting stuff out and they're like, no, this is shareware, we want people to experience it. And then gaming, kind of like, especially PC gaming, really just kind of blew up. And it was like, okay, well, you can't not charge for your game, but you still had indie developers like this that were like, no, we're not going to charge 50, 60. Like, we probably couldn't get it. Like, we're a European team that's not, like, we're not going to be able to compete with those AAAs. But also, like to me, you can almost like feel the passion in a game like this, where the creators genuinely, and it's that like first part, it's that like the one guy comes over the hill, and you're like, yeah, I gotcha. And then like the next thing is the like 20 guys come over the hill. Like, that to me, I'd love to be in that design room where they're just like, no, this would be like, this is our like aha moment for the start of this game. And like, you really can just kind of feel the passion in the design of the levels. Like, I remember playing through some of these levels and some of these rounds and just thinking like, this is just fun. Like, there's genuine fun to hear. Whereas like some of those other games, like Duke Nukem especially, it was a lot about the novelty. It's like, oh, there's like, you're in a strip club and you're in a, like, it was very like, yeah, this is the novelty is what pays off for these games. But this one was just like, no, we just want fun. Like, this is just going to be a fun game. And I loved that about it.
For a game with no story, because there's no story, it's well written.
Yeah.
Like, it has a lot of the same humor that you get out of like a Duke Nukem.
Yeah.
But man, I'm gonna have to go back and play it again and just see, like,
you should. I'm gonna jump into them. Like, I got them. So I owned them on PC through like GOG, and I tried to get it working, but I just couldn't get, like, I'm an idiot when it comes to like getting controllers and that kind of stuff working on my PC sometimes. And so I ended up just going and rebuying them for Xbox, because it's a lot easier for me to capture off of Xbox and play it there. Besides the fact that then I can like play it on my TV and play it while I'm like doing other stuff.
And I could never play it with a controller anyway. Like,
yeah, I tried like the intro with a keyboard, and I was just like, nope, this isn't happening. Like, I've got to find a controller. I was never a PC. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, though. I mean, speaking of that, so are you kind of like ambidextrous? Like I do console, I do PC. You primarily a PC gamer?
So yeah, like I have a career because of PC gaming.
Yeah,
Like when it really boils down to it, when I was in high school, I was helping my buddy's dad out building PCs in his basement and scraping together parts because I was a broke ass kid with no
yeah,
money.
yeah,
And I didn't really own a console that I played until well into my 30s, and it was the PlayStation 3. And I bought the PlayStation 3 not to be a console. It was the cheapest Blu-ray player on the market.
it was. There were a lot of people that bought a PlayStation 3 for that exact reason. Like
Yeah.
it was the dual. It was dual. You could watch Blu-rays and play.
And so the things that I play on console, because like today, my wife and I are dinks, and we have literally every console from the PS3. And no, she has a PS2. I found it this afternoon when I was cleaning some stuff up.
Yeah,
So we have everything from the PS2 up to the PS5. We've got the Xbox 360. I've got an Xbox Series X, Switch, PC games. I so today it's everything, but really it was PC gaming. I wasn't gonna put a PlayStation or a Nintendo together in my basement
yeah,
when I could a PC.
yeah,
And so it was the id, and not just like Wolf 3D and Doom, but like Commander Keen and the other shareware stuff that,
yeah.
and whatever we were pirating in high school, let's be honest. But swapping games back and forth, probably viruses. I didn't care so much back then. It was always about the PC game, and I was a PC game elitist for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then the games that I play on a console are typically like Gran Turismo and Forza, the racing games that I can't play with a mouse and keyboard and don't necessarily want to pull the wheel out for.
Yeah.
Which I've got one too, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But like with Forza Horizon, that's not a game that you really need a wheel for. In fact,
Yeah.
it's worse on it. You
Yeah.
just
I tried it with my wheel and I didn't like it.
yeah. Where like Motorsport or GT7 or
Yeah.
Project Cars or something like that, you really want a wheel for. So my Series X pretty much is a Forza box. Every week I log into Horizon 5 because I've been playing it since launch and I've got everything in the game.
I played the crap out of it at launch. I've died down a little bit, but every once in a while I'll get in and drive around a bit. That's an amazing game.
Yeah, every Thursday I'll jump in. I'll do what I need to do to get the new exclusives and on for that. But especially as old as I am, my gaming now consists of Diablo 3, Diablo 4, Forza, and that's about it. Like
About it. It adds up. That time adds up. Like with with everything else you have to do. So the reason I asked the PC and console this was like my sweet spot in PC. Like I had started as a console, like I had like NES, SNES growing up, and then I hit that zone like the end of high school where it was that same kind of thing. Like me and an uncle bought like 20 junk computers from the library for pennies on the dollar, made whatever good ones we could from them, sold them to college students, and with that money went and built my own. And so that ranged from like 96 to about 2002. I was a PC gamer. I was that like, we're passing shareware, we're like playing this kind of stuff, like all of that. And modding, like the modding was the big thing for me. Like I had never, because there's no modding in the console world. But it got to PC, and I'm like making Duke Nukem levels and making golf courses on like MS-DOS Golf, or I can't even remember what golf game I was playing. But that's honestly like that PC era is what opened my eyes to like game design. So I'm kind of in that same like my my career's obviously shifted around quite a bit, but like that's why I got into game design in the first place was those like PC days. And now I kind of find myself have gone back to consoles. But this was like the sweet spot of PC gaming for me. This like the original two Baldur's Gate games are still hold up as like probably my top three all time. Um, this like those other first person shooters, like tons of that kind of stuff. But it's funny to see like just how things kind of shift and change. But this was the like PC sweet spot for me, for someone who probably now considers myself like primarily a console gamer again.
Back in the late 90s, I worked at Computer City before they got bought by CompUSA. And that was the first time that I actually had like a computer that was even close to current.
Uh,
Yeah, so that was a few years before like this game came out. But so we're talking like Quake 2,
yeah,
Unreal, like the OG Unreal,
yeah,
stuff like that. And you know, that job led to other jobs that got me working as a network engineer and then as a security engineer and security architect, and like when we were working together where I wore all the hats.
uh,
um, and yeah, I owe a lot of that to being the broke ass high school student who couldn't afford a computer. Took
uh,
the hand me down, like my first computer that could play a game, so like a 386, something like that, that I
yeah,
built, was all spare parts that were too old for my friend's dad's garage business or basement
yep,
business, selling computers. And I think I was paying like $4 a megabyte for everything. If it was RAM or if it was hard,
uh,
I think it was like $4 a meg. And um, when you're making minimum wage in the early 90s, like that's a lot.
uh. It adds
So
up. I remember going to like, did you ever like I don't know. Oh no, because you didn't grow up in Salt, or did you grow up
no,
in
I
Salt
didn't.
Lake?
I grew up downtown.
Like, did you ever go to the like where the Redwood Drive-In is, that swap meet?
Oh yeah.
Like I would go there, and that's where I would find like because you could find people that had just like cleared out storage sheds or do that kind of stuff, and I would just find those like that exact same kind of thing, like someone that doesn't know what they have on their hands as far as a PC, and just part them out. Just find whatever working pieces you could and start throwing them together and
And you go
seeing
to
what you could build.
the fly by night parts companies like EBC, and
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it. There was one on like 13th and State that
Uh,
a little strip mall that
oh,
used to go in and get like gray license Microsoft stuff or
uh,
like OEM hardware that really shouldn't be sold the way that it is. And
uh,
uh,
the good old days.
uh, I, but like going back to what I was saying about how gaming led to my career, it totally did.
Yeah.
Like I got the job at Computer City because a manager from a previous job knew that I was into computers because I was playing a lot of games and talking about it. And
Yeah.
when he went there, he's like, "Come work for me," and that led to other things. So
It's crazy.
it's there's always going to be a soft spot in my heart for PC gaming, um, even when I've got all the consoles and stuff. I mean, 2020 was the year of the Switch.
Yeah.
Like no one was having therapy. We were playing Animal Crossing,
Yeah.
and that's
No, it was like mine was Zelda, but yes. Like that's what you did. Like, oh, I can't go outside and explore, so I'm going to explore Hyrule and I'm going to climb to the top of that mountain and maybe just sit there and look over the valley for a little bit and relax. Like it almost became meditative to do that because you couldn't. Like Like I totally, yeah, it's crazy. Gaming is crazy. Gaming is, I don't know. There's just something about it. There's something about gaming that is, it's magical, right? Like,
I mean, I've got a Discord full of old coworkers that you might be part of that, um, like even my current coworkers, I invited to that one so
uh,
we could play Diablo 4 when it came out last year. That's I'm like, hey, I got a Discord, just join it. I don't feel like making yet another one.
that's what I've just started adding channels to mine. It's like anytime I have something new, I'm like, I'll just add a channel. Like added a fantasy football channel to mine for that group. I've started coaching students and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I'll just make as a Discord channel. Like it's just easier to instead of making a new server, just join mine. I'll add a channel. Like we'll just chat in there. It's just easier. Like it's a great tool.
Yeah, it's yeah, not to completely derail the conversation, but when you look at how hard VoIP stuff was for gamers and Jabber servers and all kinds of crazy thing that you were trying to get working. And I think my oldest Discord channel has been going for 14 years now.
Wow, that's
2000,
impressive.
2010 or 2011, I think, is when we started it.
That's
That's for my
impressive.
old WoW guild. And
Wow.
we still play some Diablo, or a lot of those guys switched to Path of Exile and other games. I'm just too invested in Diablo since I've been playing that since launch.
I did. I got the pack like right before 4 launched. They put the like
Battle
remastered
Test.
2 and 3 on sale. And so I grabbed that, wanting to just replay 2 because it's been a decade since I've played 2. And that game, like Diablo 2 through college, like swallowed my life. Like it's another one of those that just like my life disappeared for a while
It,
into Diablo 2. And so I
that
wanted to
came
go
out
and
when I was
replay it.
working.
Yeah.
That came out when I was working at Computer City,
Oh,
and me and one of my friends, one of my coworkers, um, were playing that, and I would pack up my PC once a week on Thursdays to go over to her house, and some other friends of ours would come over. I bought a second monitor, mouse, and keyboard to leave there, and I just moved my tower back and forth. And that was like a 90-pound behemoth,
oh,
just ridiculous. And that was so we could play Diablo 2. Well, it
oh.
started with Diablo. That's what we were doing. Then Diablo 2 came out, and like when her grandmother passed away and we were cleaning the garage, her mom was paying us by buying us the Lord of Destruction expansion when it came out.
Nice.
Because that was a $50 game, and when you're making
Yeah.
$15 an hour, that's no, I was making $10 an hour back then. That's a
Uh, uh,
full day's work just for one game.
yeah. But you wanted it, man. That's probably the closest. Diablo 2 is probably the closest I've come to gaming addiction. Like, no joke. Like, it was like I was playing so much of that game. It is like the hooks that it has for like, nope, just that next round of enemies, you don't know what's going to drop. Like, the weapon you're looking for could drop in that next round of enemies. And
You're
you
looking
keep
for
going. That's like the ultimate dungeon crawling was Diablo 2.
yeah. I mean, hey, I was ranked last last week before the new D4 season came out. For the first time since playing Diablo 3, I was ranked solo monk like 129 North
Wow, that's
America, top 100.
impressive.
Uh, and it's mostly just because hardly anybody's playing Diablo 3 compared to Diablo 4 these days.
Moved over to 4.
But
That's still, I don't think I'd get anywhere on those ladders. Taking a look. So one of the other questions I had is speaking of like these kind of like indie, less expensive type games, like what are some other standouts that you have? Like kind of going back, like the sweet spot for me is that like Xbox Live Arcade era. Like I think a ton came out in that little rush of indie games. But for you, like what are some of the others that are inexpensive? We're not talking AAA, but are just like, hey, this was
Shareware,
high quality and well
Shareware,
priced.
like the original GTA,
Yeah.
the top down version, the top down view of GTA.
Yeah.
Um, that was shareware. That was
Yeah.
free. Because a lot of it is free. Commander Keen.
Yep.
A lot of the episodes of Commander Keen were shareware. It wasn't for many years after it was a relevant game that I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, there's a reason it's Commander Keen 4. There's 1, 2, and 3, and I never played them, so I went back and got them. Um, the I haven't done a lot of indie games that I'm aware of. I mean, I guess technically id was an indie studio with Wolf 3D when I started playing that, but
Yeah.
you can't really call it a indie development house anymore.
But I mean, they were shareware. Like those first titles were like they weren't shipping for money. They were shipping prove to prove technology, to capture an audience, knowing that like, hey, if we build this groundswell, like we can go. And I mean, you look at Doom now. Like Doom is a like I mean, there wouldn't be first person shooters in my opinion without Doom.
Wolf
Like
3D. I
I mean that was
got to go
first, but
back to
I think Doom turned that corner. Like I think Wolf 3D was good. Doom was great.
the being able to aim in three dimensions that you got with Doom was absolutely game changing. But I mean, Wolf 3D is genre defining. Like it is
Yeah.
the OG. When I look at real time strategies, want to know what the first modern real time strategy was? Do you know this?
No.
Dune 2, Dune, as
Yeah.
in the movie.
Yeah.
It was slightly before like Command and Conquer and quite a bit before Age of Empires and other RTSs.
Yeah.
There was some turn-based stuff, but like the modern format of RTSs goes back to that. And I don't think that was an indie publisher, but that was one of those like I think I bought it at Radio Shack of all places
Yeah.
on the discount
No,
rack.
I've definitely heard of it. I don't think I've ever played it, but I've definitely heard of it. Real time strategy has never been my forte, but like I've definitely heard of that. And it's old. Like it's
Not to
yeah.
be the Blizzard shill, but I played way more StarCraft than
Yeah.
is healthy for a human being.
Oh,
That's
sweet.
there's a lot of great and very valid criticism of Blizzard as a company, particularly in the last several years. Um,
Yeah.
that said, I've been playing every Blizzard game forever.
I mean, yeah, like politics and workplace aside, like they make some pretty amazing games.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely some passion into those games. I mean, I taught like years ago, I taught a level design course that we used the Warcraft 3 engine and built levels in that, and that's how we like did our projects. And we were like, hey, we could do this. I think I ended up switching over to like the Neverwinter Nights Aurora tool set because it gave you like a little more like dialogue options and some of that. And I don't know, I always liked that tool set just because I was a BioWare and Baldur's Gate fan, but um, really cool stuff. Like Blizzard has they're not afraid. They like Nintendo, and I don't know if this is still the case, but back in the day, they like Nintendo were never afraid to say, nope, we need more time. Like, sorry, it's not going to make holiday. This game needs more polish. Like they were never afraid to slide a release date and say this doesn't meet our standards. Whereas
They've
like
had rough releases. They like Diablo 3, the first
yeah,
years, or whatever it was until they came out with like the Loot 2.0 patch. Um, that was rough when they had
yeah.
like the real money auction house where people were selling shit.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that.
Like, so they've definitely maybe not rushed things to market, but not thought about it. Diablo
Yeah.
4 is particularly like the season one of Diablo 4 was rough. There was a lot of tone deaf responses from the developers. You know, I will say they fixed a lot of that with this current season. not everything, and they never will fix everything. You can't please gamers as a
You
species.
can't. You definitely cannot.
As a species, you can't please a gamer ever.
Nope. So one of the things I always do, and as part of this, is turn the table over to you. Anything you wanna, like anything you have going on, you want to shout out, like the floor is yours. Any conferences, projects, anything you're doing, you wanna give a call out to?
Um, Conferences, for anybody that's in the even remotely related to the information security world. Um, St. Con is going to be in October. It's the largest community conference. It is infosec related, but if you work in tech, you're going to find value by going to it. It's in planning stages right now. I don't yet know if I'm going to be staffing again this year. It's a conference that I've been an attendee once at, and I've been a volunteer or staff ever since, and I've been going to for a decade. Um, the There's also 801 Labs Hackerspace downtown. If people are interested in checking that out, Thursday nights are classes, discussions, various hangouts, projects, things like that. Basically, Thursday nights when everything happens there. But it's downtown Salt Lake City, and it's 801labs.org. Um, they also have a Discord, a very active one, so it is muted on my system, that they do a lot of things with. And I think, no, I already hosted that talk. I was going to say, I think I'm hosting a talk coming up, but that's a different group that I'm doing that for. The DC Davis County group, I'm going to be hosting a roundtable talk about security validation in a month, I want to say. I don't even know if they have a website. Everything they do is on Discord. So
Sweet. Tons of stuff going on. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. So that's fantastic. Well, again, like thank you for your donation. It is greatly appreciated. We're trying to raise money for the Children's Hospital, Primary Children's here in Salt Lake. So any little bit counts, and we'll dive into some serious Sam and see how it goes. I'm excited to see the nostalgia of this game come rushing back. The pack I bought are the remastered ones, so I'm actually kind of curious to see like how well that went over, like if it was just kind of a graphical overhaul or what. So
yeah, and I was reading up a little bit on that just today before we started our chat. I also have that pack on Steam, and so I'm pretty sure that's what's installed. I'm gonna have to fire it up and see what that's all about.
Sweet, sounds good. Okay, again, thanks for joining me. Thank you for the donation. Thanks for all you do for the Salt Lake tech community as well. Like it's small Lake City around here, so we like to see us all working towards the same goal with each other.
All right, man. Thanks.
See ya.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at Serious Sam, which was originally a PC release. It has been ported to everything. Like you can play this game almost everywhere. But one of the things that kind of I got into as I dove into this game per Marv's request, and we kind of even talked about this a little bit as you saw before, but this game kind of just has it has a nostalgic feel to it. Like these old first-person shooters, whenever I play them, I kind of get into this like nostalgic groove, and it took me on a journey. I started with the original Serious Sam First Encounter, but to play that I had to buy I was playing it as the HD remake for starters, and that pack comes with the second encounter, it comes with DLC, it comes with Serious Sam 3, and then one of the standalone expansions for Serious Sam 4 is on Games Pass. So I kind of got into a deep dive of the Serious Sam franchise for a little bit and played quite a few of them. I played one through its entirety, and went all the way through, and then dove into some of the others. But it really got me thinking even more about kind of that early history of first person shooters. And so I kind of spent a little time with a lot of games and kind of wanted to recap some of those, as I think Serious Sam plays its part in that history of first person shooters. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of have that discussion on where these games sort of came from, their upbringing, the originals, what mechanics were added when, and kind of just talk about that timeline a little bit. So I wanted to spend a little time and dive into that before we start talking the specific mechanics of Serious Sam. So we're going to roll this all the way back to 1992. And for those that aren't familiar with video game history and the companies that come out of video games, these first-person shooters, I mean, not the first. There were others, and we're generalizing a little bit. But id Software is kind of the creators of this movement of first-person shooter software. And that started in 1992. I mean, it didn't technically start. I think there was like Battle Tanks before that was also id Software. But in 1992, Wolfenstein 3D really popularized this genre, this shooter genre that went on to spawn these other games that we'll talk about. But incredibly, at the time, I mean, it was groundbreaking, but it simplistic as we look back at it now. I mean, these were texturized 3D environments. They were texture mapped 3D environments, and everything was still flat. Like, we were basically mimicking 3D to a certain extent with textures. You could turn left, you could turn right, you could move forward, move back, and you could strafe, which is the like side to side movement for those that aren't aware. There was no look controls in a sense. Like, you could obviously like look left and right, turn your body left and right, but there wasn't that sense of like, hey, I need to look in all 360 directions. That came way later. There was no jumping, and these levels were incredibly flat. You can kind of see this as we show some of this footage, but there was no verticality to any of these levels, and your gameplay mechanics were mazes. Like these were mazes that you had to find your way through. Gatekeeping was another big mechanic. The idea that, hey, you need the gold key to go through this door, the silver key, the bronze key, I think were the keys in Wolfenstein. And then you obviously had the action. You had the combat, the shooting of these guards, and that's kind of where we started. And then you jump a year forward. id Software again with Doom in 1993. The key things with Doom is we add multiplayer, like we add this deathmatch mode where you can play against other people. And it really started to push technological boundaries as far as the graphics go. Things got amped up a little bit. It also established modding communities within these PC games. And this idea that, hey, I can create a map and I can share it with my friends over an FTP site or in a chat room. I mean, we're still talking early internet here. This is not the internet that we know and love today. You were file sharing in FTP sites and other somewhat what we view now as like archaic means, but that is how you shared files back in the day. And still the same type of controls. You can turn left, you can turn right, move forward, move back, strafe. Still no jumping, but the levels did add verticality. There were enemies sometimes stationed up above. You didn't have the sense of being able to look up and shoot them. You kind of just had your reticle would display red if you were on the right line, and then your bullet would kind of automatically gain that verticality. So kind of cheating that verticality a little bit, but the levels did have that sense of stairways and going up levels and down levels. And although you couldn't jump, you could create that verticality by having the steps that your character would kind of go up through. Same kind of mechanics though. Your mazes, your gatekeeping, your combat. Nothing really beyond that necessarily. And then jump a few years more forward to 1996, and we get the release of Quake, which is where we really take a graphical leap. Those 3 years, still, again, we're still looking at id Software. Like, all three of these are id Software games. Quake really introduces true 3D environments and models. Like, characters are now 3D. They're not flat sprites that do a rotation model. You're really getting crude but three-dimensional characters, and you can kind of see that in the way the graphics show here. And the other thing that you start adding, you get jumping, which is a huge change in first-person shooters at the time. You also get, not the first, but you get the game that really popularized mouse look, or mouse aim, depending on what you want to call it, where on the PC, you're utilizing your mouse to kind of guide your player around. Your mouse is controlling your shooting reticle. And by doing that, you take that step from just turning left and right, moving forward, back. You really get that sense of, I can walk with the keys, but I look with my mouse. And so you're kind of putting your movement on one control and your look on another control. And that starts to leapfrog. Like as we get down the road, you start to see that becoming more and more prevalent. And it really kind of reaches its crux with Halo. I mean, first-person shooters on the PC haven't really changed from this. You use WASD or the arrow keys for your movement, and you use your mouse for your look. And that's why a lot of PC master racers kind of view PCs as the ultimate first-person shooter, because you have that precision in the mouse. If you need to aim, you can aim better with the mouse. And that's why a lot of people won't play it on consoles. But you have games like Halo, which we'll talk about, that really kind of fine-tunes those console controls by doing exactly that, putting movement on one thumbstick and your look on another thumbstick. So in our brains, we can kind of start to differentiate the movement from the looking. And that kind of continues to this day. Halo's control scheme really revolutionized that. And you see almost all first-person shooters control in that same scheme as we move forward. And all of the ports, like myself, I played all of these games, all these early id games on the Xbox, and same thing. Like they all ported their controls to that style of scheme, at least the best they could, without truly having a look. All of these games, I mean, Quake, Doom, Wolfenstein, even getting into like Duke Nukem 3D, these were shareware titles. And me and Marv kind of talked about this a little bit before. This concept of shareware in the early to even late 90s was kind of groundbreaking. This idea that, hey, you could copy this game on a floppy disk or CD-ROM or whatever time frame we're in, and you could give it to friends. They actively encourage you sharing this with your friends. And hey, this is a game that I got. You should try Duke Nukem. I have this game. And again, like sharing things over FTP. And basically what that shareware model did was it's kind of the original demo model where, hey, you have the first couple of levels maybe, or maybe it's timed. Maybe you can play for an hour, 2 hours, more or less than that. And then it would basically ask you for a key and say, hey, your trial's done. You need to pay for the rest of this game if you want to continue playing. Or in the case of the levels, like some people, like I remember playing that first level of Duke Nukem, like 50 times, where it was just fun to just go and replay it. And I couldn't afford to go and purchase the full game, but eventually I did. Like eventually I was like, hey, I've played enough of this. Like I'm going to save up my allowance and I'm going to get the full version of Duke Nukem 3D. And it was an incredibly different model at the time. People were used to kind of saying, hey, I'll pay for the software and I have it. There wasn't that sense of demo. And as we kind of launched the internet and gaming started to change in that way, this shareware model became crucial for companies like id, where they were getting their games in front of millions of people and driving that revenue. They didn't have to spend money on marketing. They were letting people do the marketing for them, which is a really, really crazy idea at the time, but ultimately made them the giant they were during this 90s gaming phase. Then you start to get, in the late 90s, you start to move into some other areas with things like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. These games were to some viewed as like less than, because they weren't PC games. You lost some of that precision. But what they did is they put FPSs on consoles. They proved that an FPS could exist on a console. And you could play it with friends. Prior to this, it was like you were getting together and doing LAN parties. There was no, hey, let's all gather and play on my N64. You had to string your computers together and you had to join networks and you had to be somewhat like computer savvy to be able to play with your friends on these other FPSs. There wasn't a great way otherwise. Quake started to introduce the sort of WAN connection sort of stuff, but you generally had to know what you were doing to be able to play with friends. Whereas on the N64, there's split screen. Like we now have split screen multiplayer where it's running all 4 instances of this game on the one machine that's being powered and everyone can play. And you start to have screen sniping where you're looking at where your friends are and taking a shot at them and kind of seeing where people spawn. So changed the genre a little bit, but it proved it can work on consoles, which kind of leads us down a little different route to a certain extent. And it also introduced more objective-based campaign modes where you did kind of have, hey, you've got to complete these few things and move on in addition to the multiplayer. Whereas it was, you kind of had start to split a couple of different ways. Later in the 90s, we also see Half-Life in 1998, Unreal Tournament in 1999, Counter-Strike in 2000. I mean, two of those in Half-Life and Counter-Strike being Steam produced games. So Steam starting to really make a name for itself. Steam and Valve, I guess I shouldn't say Steam. I kind of grouped the two together. Valve making this themselves and really making a name for themselves in that game space. And they were groundbreaking. Like Half-Life and the later Half-Life 2 changed this genre completely. And Counter-Strike really is kind of the birth of esports to a certain extent. Like Counter-Strike was kind of one of the first, like it and potentially like StarCraft, like really started to drive this like, hey, what about games as competition and worldwide competition? So again, always continuing to build stuff. And then in 2001, same year as Serious Sam, you have Halo. You have the original Halo Combat Evolved on the original Xbox. And it completely redefined what a console FPS could be. And if I remember correctly, it was dual. It was PC and Xbox released. You had both of them released simultaneously, if I remember, by Bungie, who we didn't talk about it, but Bungie started with a game called Marathon, which was another FPS that was quite a bit earlier. I want to say it was in the like 95 range. It might have even been earlier than that, but it was released only on Apple, which kind of chopped the legs off of its potential release because everyone was kind of on PCs at the time. Apple hadn't had that next resurgence yet, where they released the iMac and that kind of stuff, and they came back into public favor. So not as many people saw Marathon, but again, really good, technically sound game. And what Halo did is kind of what we talked about, where you're really revolutionizing these FPS controls for a console controller, putting movement on one thumbstick, camera on another thumbstick, so you can kind of look and move separately. And people haven't gone back since then. Like that is kind of the way that consoles handle those controls. That's kind of the standard control now. There's no sense to move on from what is nearly perfect. So those have kind of stuck around. And so that kind of gives you the rundown of where this genre came from, and what we have leading up to Serious Sam. Serious Sam first encounter was 2001, same year as Halo, but very different style games to a certain extent. Like Serious Sam is kind of following in the footsteps of like a Duke Nukem, where it's a little cruder, a little more just sort of like we refer to it as like bullet hell kind of games, whereas Halo was more of a narrative driven. Like you had the Master Chief and the Arbiter, and you have this story mode going on. And Halo also kind of had the dichotomy of multiplayer versus campaign, which Serious Sam doesn't really have particularly well. They're a campaign, and the multiplayer was kind of not really there to the extent that Halo was. Halo was that dichotomy of like an amazing campaign and a really solid multiplayer together. But looking at First Encounter, per Marv's request, I played through the entirety of this one, this first entry into the Serious Sam franchise. I want to say I originally played it in probably 2002 is my guess, and I had touched on it like over the years. I mean, that was more than 20 years ago. I've played it a couple of other times here and there, never gone through the whole thing since then. But I was pleasantly surprised to get back into this game. And this was the first time I had played the HD remake as well. I'd played the original that I think I own on GOG, and kind of installed it a couple of times and tried it out because I remember it being entertaining. But one of the things that it didn't have going for it was competing against Counter-Strike, Doom 3, Unreal, Duke Nukem, Halo. Like I said, like all of these are the games that were out that same time frame as it, and so the competition was steep. Like after those first id releases, Serious Sam just had a tough go as far as competition goes. This market was pretty crowded, and with the popularity of GoldenEye and Turn Perfect Dark from Rare, these games were being made all over the place because those games captured a huge audience, and so things were rough in this time for Serious Sam. It was impressive, but you had the Halos to compete against, and Valve had announced Half-Life 2 at the time as well. So a lot of people were like, "Well, I'm waiting for Half-Life 2." Some of the trailers for that look amazing, and that's kind of where I'm putting my money. Back in the day when we couldn't just get everything, you kind of had to pick and choose what games you wanted to get. But what Serious Sam did well, and me and Marv talked on this a little bit, but it was kind of the bargain bin FPS. Like, it wasn't the full price Halo, it wasn't the full price Half-Life. When Half-Life and Half-Life 2 roll around, you could get it relatively inexpensive at the time, and so it spoke a lot to people who were on a budget like that. And that's ultimately why I got it. Is I was like, hey, I can afford Serious Sam. I can't afford the next Half-Life necessarily. That was larger than I could pay. So it was kind of a nice break for that, and still a really well-made game. I mean, you have a lot of the same things as we talked about as far as mechanics. It is combat. Like, combat is the main mechanic in Serious Sam. It's even less so where Wolfenstein and Doom had kind of that maze element. Serious Sam has even less of that. Like, there were less mazes that I found in replaying through this. I remember there being more of that originally, but playing through it again, like, there's less of that than I remember. There's less of the gatekeeping. Like, there's a handful of like, hey, you got to press this button before this door will open. But we're talking maybe once per level, not a lot. And the buttons are usually like pretty easy to find. There wasn't necessarily a challenge. So this game really puts all the chips in on the combat. And you have gigantic combat simulations. And that's kind of what you see through the rest of this, is that focus on combat. The level design is pretty straightforward. Like we said, there's not a ton of mazes here. It's really just get from point A to point B, and you have thousands of enemies in your way, and things are gate kept pretty well. Like, there's definitely some doors you got to go through to kind of access the next area. Tons of drops, like tons of bullet refills, like ammo refills, health refills. I played on the lesser settings. I'm an easy advocate. I'm an easy mode advocate for games. I don't have the skill or the time to play these types of games on hard mode. I'm sure things would be significantly more difficult and a higher challenge if I did. But I mean, I even had a hard time on easy. Like, there were definitely parts that I was dying multiple times. So there's definitely challenge and replayability here. You could go back through and replay it on the next difficulty. I think there's 4 settings, and I played on the first one. Like, you could replay this on all these different settings and get a ton of replayability. With that level design, the one thing that I noticed is just there's some huge areas here, which when they're filled with enemies are fantastic. You can run around, you have the room to like really play with like cannonballs, rockets, like weapons that would be dangerous in close quarters. But as soon as those enemies are gone, depending on where you ended that fight, you now have a like 2-minute plus just wandering your way back through that big open area to get back to where I have to go. And that became kind of tedious. That's the one thing that I wish there was like something to do a little bit better. Maybe there's some kind of like teleport. I kept thinking of like Minecraft ender pearls, where I wish I could just throw like a teleport ball that would at least like jump me huge chunks. Because there were some cases where when I ended a fight, I was on the polar opposite end of where I needed to go. And in some cases, because you're spinning around so much, like getting all these enemies coming from every direction, you can get disoriented. And so you get in these giant areas, get disoriented, and then you don't know which way to go. So you go to one side and realize like, okay, that's where I actually already was. And then you have to walk clear across that vast expanse to get to where you're going. So that's one of my biggest complaints, I would say, with Serious Sam, is I love the size when it's filled with enemies, but as soon as those enemies are gone, that size becomes kind of troublesome to deal with. The overall design and look it gets repetitive. Like, every level you're based in Egypt, so you're seeing the same like temples and pyramids and sand and sand and sand and sand, and there's not a ton of visual difference. You have the one level that's like the oasis, and it's like kind of right about in the middle where it's just like, where did this come from? And you almost find yourself wishing that you could get back to something like that, where it's like, hey, give me a little bit more. Give me more of that oasis. Give me some other locales to search. And this started to get fixed in the later iterations, obviously. But this first encounter is just that. It is Egypt, and not a ton of visual difference. You do have it towards the end, the level that takes place at night, which I thought was a really good visual change. Again, like, I would have loved to have seen more of that. Like, throw some at night, throw some at dusk and dawn, where the sun is maybe coming up over some of those temples or something. Like, give me some kind of visual difference so that I'm very clear what level I'm in, because there were some times where it was like, I didn't even know if I had switched levels or if I went to another one, because they all just look the same. And so when I'm trying to like load save games, I'm trying to remember which one I'm in, and there's no real visual difference to know what's necessarily going on there. Some really interesting moments in that gameplay, though. There's the one level, I think a lot of people refer to it as the gauntlet, but it is like the running of the bulls, where you are kind of in this long, narrow corridor, and you just have these like bone enemies like coming at you, just one after another after another. I died multiple times there, where I just kept finding myself wishing that there was like some other mechanic, because it was just like backpedal and shoot grenade launcher, because I found those bone enemies, we'll talk about it here in a second, but they are the absolute worst in the entire game. And the grenade launcher is kind of the best weapon I could find to fight those. And so I found myself doing that. I wish I had something more like being able to knock buildings down on them, or set traps, or do something that wasn't just like shoot, and backpedal, because again, you're backpedaling through that whole gauntlet, and then you just got to run forward through it all. And it just kind of got tedious in that exact same way. Some of the other arenas at the end are fantastic. You have enemies jumping down from the ceiling, coming from all directions. It's really fun and intense. It's kind of, we've talked about it multiple times now, but it's a bullet hell where the bullets are enemies, and they are just swamping you, and sometimes you're losing track, and all of the enemies have this particular sound that they have, and so sometimes you'd hear those sounds and be caught off guard. Like the obvious ones are like the kamikazes have that like screaming sound, and you'd hear that and you're like, oh man, where is it? Like, I've got to do a 360 around and try to find where this enemy is. And the bulls were the same way. You'd hear that like, and you're like, oh man, this guy's gonna hit me and take a huge chunk out of my life. And so those sounds were great cues to be able to hear some of those enemies that were a little bit different. The bones had the same kind of like, they had like a gallop to it, where it was like, oh man, he's like on the way. I've got to figure out what to do. But again, I would have loved to have seen more interactive pieces in these worlds. You have these giant arenas, like, give me the ability to like knock a tower down on top of an enemy. You could shoot it with rockets and it would crumble, but it didn't do anything. Like, maybe it hit a secret entrance to somewhere where you could get some more ammo. I didn't find myself running out of ammo too often, but I was also playing on an easier setting. So I would have loved to have seen that kind of stuff, but have an effect on the enemies. Maybe I could open some traps in the ground where the bulls would fall down into, or something like that. Just give me some kind of difference that I could have the ability to do that. You do start to get a little bit of verticality in the level design towards the end, where you are making your way upstairs, you're jumping down from areas, but for the most part, there's not a lot of that in the early stages, and it gets introduced a little bit later than you would hope, but it is there. Like, you start to get a little bit of that. As we kind of talk through some of the enemies, you've got a good, enemies are all over the place in this game. You have robots, monsters, aliens, other stuff. Like, the idea is like you're time traveling, but like there's still just this eclectic mix of like all sorts of different types of enemies. Like I said, there's some that are aliens, some that are robots. Like, who knows what's going on? But as we kind of walk through them, you have your typical just like cannon fodder enemy. It's like there's like the one-eyed creature. I don't like. in all fairness, I have no clue what these real names are. I'm describing them to how they are in my view. So I'm sure there's someone that's going to define all of these enemies somewhere in comments. But you have the like one-eyed creatures and the other like humanoid looking guys with like spread guns and that kind of stuff. They're kind of just placed as cannon fodder. Like there's not a ton of challenge there. They're just the one-eyed creatures are just going to charge you and try to hit you. The human guys with guns are just going to they're ranged cannon fodder. Then you start to get into like the kamikazes, where they're headless, bombs on both of their hands. They're just charging you and exploding as soon as they get close. And that adds like a fun little mix. Like I remember there's that one moment, I think in like level 2, where one of them comes running over the hill, and Serious Sam has some comments about like, oh, that's the end of you. And then like 20 more come up over the hill. That's like that first moment where it's like, okay, like now we're getting into it. The first level was a little bit of a like, yeah, there's some enemies, but it's not out of control. And that's kind of your first, like, it hits the fan sort of moment. And that was a fun moment in this game. And it sets the tone for kind of the rest of the game. You have things like the scorpions, which are again, like not overly difficult. They're kind of just more of a bullet sponge, where it's like the other cannon fodder, but takes a lot more bullets. They have the chain gun, so like if you do expose yourself, like they can definitely rip a little more damage than those humans go. You also have the skeleton runners, which were just the worst. Like I don't know if there's a strategy I missed or something, but I found myself anytime I was in a fight with multiple of them, it was rough. Like I would just backpedal and throw grenade launchers at their feet, hoping that like it would bounce off and get some of them. And those were like the one times where I felt like I would get low on ammo. That grenade launcher was the best I could find for them, and there wasn't always a ton of grenades around. It was one of those guns that like you didn't always have ammo for, whereas the ones that took kind of just your traditional ammo that could cross across guns, you were never really running low on that. So, I mean, those enemies were just the worst. The bulls are incredibly hard. Like the cannonball kind of became my best friend. Cannonball and rocket, you would switch, and you kind of start to find that each enemy you would find has a very particular weapon, which is like, okay, I've got to use this against them and this against them. And that's kind of what you see as you continue. You have like the Valkyries. I don't like, they might have been like sirens or something. I don't know, but they're the flying creatures. Like those were kind of rough because you would see them clear off in the distance, and they're just too far to really hit with anything. They're moving, so you couldn't like launch a rocket at them. They're so far that like you couldn't really aim until they got close. You have like the little frogs that drove me crazy. I don't know what they were, but just little frogs, and they would come in swarms, and they were really low to the ground, so you had to like look down. It was less of a like eye to eye kind of level, and again, just like can be frustrating at times. You have like the green, I think like the forearm alien that shot the like plasma balls. Again, mixing like aliens, robots. I mean, speaking of robots, you have the like mech type robots that come in like a red and blue, where like one is big, one is small. Using rockets on those, like that's kind of what I found, is like that's where I save my rockets for, is those robots. I had completely forgotten about the lava creatures from the first time I had played. So when I came across the lava creatures later in the game, I was like, whoa, I forgot that these are even in here. And again, you have like all kinds of different stuff. You have electric fish in the sewer levels. And then you also have like almost every one of those enemy types has a sort of boss version of it. You kind of have, in level 2, you have a large scorpion as a boss, where it's the same enemy, they just blow it up a little bit. And 3 or 4 has like the big alien guy, where like it's one of those 4-armed aliens, but it's huge, and you're really trying to like take it down with rockets and other stuff. But they're really just scales of it. Like you don't see anything groundbreaking with it. And we'll kind of talk about that here as we get into the later games, where I think they solve that for the better. But really good mix of enemies and different strategies, different guns. Some you just have to backpedal, some it's worth charging. So that kind of made it fun. That switch with the different aliens and different enemies really made for an entertaining experience. as we take a look at the guns, there's obviously like a ton of hit and miss here. There's some fun stuff. There's some stuff that I rarely used. You have your classic melee weapon and the knife, which was useless in this game. But you have your pistol, your shotgun, like those are pretty typical, and they played exactly as you'd expect. Not super powerful, but in a pinch, like you can get some of those cannon fodder guys. You start to get into like the Gatling gun, which is kind of the staple of this franchise. Like it's on the cover art, like you have the Serious Sam with like the big Gatling gun kind of thing. So again, like tons of firepower for something like that. And you get into rockets, grenade launchers, all kinds of stuff. One of my favorites became the lasers. Like that laser gun was one of my favorites. It seemed to do pretty well against almost every enemy type, which you couldn't say for some of the other guns. Some of the other guns were very specific to different enemies. That laser was kind of a good all around, and you could generally find a decent amount of ammo as you were looking over. You also get into like some of the overkill stuff like the cannonball. The cannonball was useful for the bosses, like the final boss. You pretty much use all the cannonballs you can. The bulls I found were also very good for the cannonball. If you could get them all charging in a line, you could shoot the one cannonball because the cannonball would travel through enemies. And so that's where it became nice for things like the bull, is if you could get them in a line, you could pretty much take out 2 or 3 of them with that cannonball. So some fun mechanics there too, varying things up. It's not just a different skin where it's like, okay, this is a laser gun and it works just like the shotgun, except it's a laser. And you did get some different mechanics in those guns. They performed differently. They were better on different enemies than others. And they used ammo in slightly different ways as well. Like you were limited on things like rockets and grenades and cannonballs, whereas things like the shotgun and pistol, and even to a certain extent like the Gatling gun and lasers, you kind of had plenty of ammo. It was just a matter of what type of enemy are you using it on. The final boss for this first one was fun. Like again, it's just like a giant scale enemy, like nothing crazy until you get to kind of phase 2. Gets a little bit different. I actually didn't realize that there was a phase 2. I kept fighting that phase 1 forever until to the point where I was like out of ammo, and he would just keep regenerating health. And it wasn't until I like ran out of ammo completely without dying, because most of the times I would just die before I ran out of ammo. But I finally ran out of ammo and started having to like explore and go like, okay, well where, like I need more ammo. I've got to go run around. And then I found that you actually like have to go through a corridor and get to phase 2 of this fight. So I wasted probably an hour like trying to beat him, just straight up, me and him. And I just didn't even think that maybe I've got to like go through this corridor and enter phase 2. But once you finally do that, like that first phase is just bullet sponge, where it's, hey, you throw everything you can. You use all your cannonballs first, then you go to rockets, then you go to maybe grenade launchers. He's a little bit far away for that grenade launcher to reach, but I mean, I went through lasers, and you're pretty much throwing everything you have at him until he gets to that like respawn moment where he like builds his health back up. And then you have the corridor that you go through, and then it kind of becomes a more close quarters fight. Like he is right there in the arena with you, and you're looking up at him and shooting, and he has the ability to like stomp down on you. But the fun part is you get these like jumping portals where you can jump your way up, and then it kind of flings you through the air, and like through the air you're trying to shoot almost down on him. Whereas before, like you were the like tiny little mouse in this arena, you're now up above the fight. And it was a nice break, because prior to this, like it was just shooting. There wasn't, I almost wish that there was more of this spread throughout the game. I wish some of these other bosses have these sort of like vertical launchers and things like that to break up that monotony, because there were a lot of spots in this game where I felt like something like that could have been useful to just, again, like change it up a little bit. Give me a little bit of different gameplay to mix in with the shooting. But overall, the boss was fun, and that second phase especially felt more like a boss battle. The first phase is really just like, we're just going to amp up his health, and you just got to shoot him. And I was afraid that was going to be it, because I honestly couldn't remember it from the first time I played 20 years ago. And I thought like, okay, this is just going to be a bullet sponge. Like there's not going to be challenge here. And So I was refreshed to see that phase 2. I like when you get that, when you get more of a, hey, this isn't just the same old dude you've been fighting with more life, because the mini bosses throughout the levels are exactly that. They're just bullet sponges that are the same model and even texture in some cases as their miniature versions. And so it was fun to see that kind of switch up. As we move into the second encounter, just want to talk a little bit. I mean, I played through maybe a quarter of this one, got only a few levels in. I didn't have the time to get through all of it. You get a visual change. At least the first part of the game, the first third of the game, takes place in the Mayan jungle. So you get green grass and you're not just like looking at sand all the time. So that was a fun break. Being able to run through that jungle was definitely a welcome change compared to the Egypt that I had just spent hours on in the first encounter. Some of the other stuff you get, like the new pumpkin head enemy, which was fun. He's running at you with a chainsaw. That chainsaw is also an addition. Like instead of the knife, you now have a chainsaw, which as a novelty was fun to use. It was definitely more entertaining than the knife from the first encounter, but again, like not really feasible in the grand scheme of things. It's not gonna help you in any scenario. It just gives you, if you do run out of ammo, you have something that doesn't require ammo, but not super useful. You also have like a dinosaur kind of looking creature, which just, I don't know if anyone is as old as me or remembers the cartoons I do, but it just reminded me of, there's an old cartoon called the Dino-Saucers. It was like this mix of like, it wasn't Transformers because they didn't transform, but it was like this good versus evil, and they're kind of matching in that same way, like how it's like Optimus versus Megatron, but they were dinosaurs from the past or the future, or I can't even remember, but that's all he reminded me of was the Dino-Saucers cartoon. And you get a sniper gun, which was interesting, especially when you got into these huge areas. It was kind of fun to like pull out that sniper rifle and try to take out the guys that were like clear up on those rooftops. Instead of like having to run clear across the thing like we talked about, you could bring out the sniper rifle and kind of get to them. You also had the flamethrower, which was just, I mean, for a game like this, it was just fun. Like this game is about over-the-top enemies, over-the-top weapons. That flamethrower fits right in with it. Like this is a standard kind of over-the-top weapon, which was super fun. Not particularly effective against very many enemies, but it was fun to use. And the graphics in the HD at least were really good. Like it looked really, really fun. You get more power-ups throughout this game as well. Like you get speed boosts and invulnerability and stuff. I felt like they were more predominant in this game and not as tied to secret areas. In first encounter, you pretty much only got those if you found secret areas. This game seemed to have more of them spread out throughout that were available to use. You also have the enemy AI made some changes here too. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to beeline it right towards you. You have this sense of like, hey, they would evade. Like they would take zigzags on their way to you. Instead of just like charging right at you, they would kind of make these turns to make it a little more difficult. It wasn't just, okay, well, I can backpedal and line you up and shoot you. They were zigzagging. They were moving side to side, which gave it a little bit of an extra challenge. Real quick, I didn't play Serious Sam 2. I always assumed that the second encounter was Serious Sam 2, which I did not realize that there was a separate Serious Sam 2 that most people say was garbage. Like it didn't have the same graphic style, the gameplay was different, and it's even been removed canonically from the Serious Sam lore. So I didn't spend any time on 2. But I did jump into Serious Sam 3 because it was also included on the collection. I mean, we're not taking the jump to 2011. So we're a 10-year leap from Serious Sam First Encounter to Serious Sam 3. And you can see it in the graphics. Like the graphics in Serious Sam 3 look worlds different. Some of my thoughts on it, I didn't play. I played maybe 2 to 3 levels of this one. It just didn't have the same charm as Serious Sam First Encounter and Second Encounter. It almost felt like they were trying to chase a Call of Duty. You're in a war-torn city, not as many enemies, like maybe an enemy hiding behind bunkers. the enemies were a lot more scarce. It felt more like a tactical game where it's like, okay, I've got to find cover and then I'll pop up and take a shot. And it's more about finding your way around this war-torn city. And from what I hear, it gets a little bit more in line with the series as you move on. I didn't have the time to get past that. What I did like is it has the drone guns that you can kind of take control of. And I thought that was a neat mechanic. It almost made me wish you had stuff like that in First Encounter, where rather than just me shooting them, maybe I could go set up a sentry gun and put that in that gauntlet that we talked about and start to line those up where it almost becomes like a tower defense game, where you could maybe switch this up from, instead of just being pure first-person shooter, maybe it's this tactical game where you also can set up these towers of sentry guns, and it becomes this mix of FPS and tower defense. And I thought that was a kind of neat break from the typical, and I kind of enjoyed that. They also added, from what I understand, I didn't get to them, unfortunately, but they added jetpacks to this game, so you can get all the verticality you want and flying through stuff. And for those large enemies, again, like we mentioned, I would have loved to have seen the jump things, the jump portals from that main boss in First Encounter throughout the rest of the game. The jetpack kind of does that. It allows you like, hey, I'm gonna take this to the skies, and I'm gonna shoot down on some of these aliens. I'm gonna give myself some space in this situation. So again, they're starting to understand more and more that you've got to vary the gameplay. But for me, like that, the tacticalness of the small enemies just wasn't it. I would have loved to have seen those mechanics, but with the bullet hell style enemies is really what I was going for. And you start to get that as we jump to the next iteration. I didn't play the Serious Sam 4 base game, but I did jump into the Siberian Mayhem. This is a 2022 release. This is a kind of standalone adventure built on the Serious Sam 4 engine. But it takes place in like winter Russia, which again, like great visual break. Like we have, it's snow and ice, and you have like Russian graffiti and stuff all over. Again, it's like any visual difference you could give me was welcome in these games. I kind of played the hours that it took me to get through that first one. I was so sick of the sand and Egypt that all of these different iterations were kind of nice. And maybe that's part of why the Serious Sam 3 didn't appeal to me, is you're back to the sand. You're back in Egypt. And at least for those first levels, like walking through sand and war-torn, like sandstone building kind of stuff. So Siberian Mayhem was kind of fun. And you have like drones. You started to introduce more technology. And so that was kind of a fun change as well. It was a little bit less reliant on aliens and that kind of stuff, and more reliant on, hey, we have technology that we're shooting down. And it was kind of a fun mix. The graphics on this one look fantastic. Like I was playing on the Series X, and things look beautiful. I mean, this game's only 2 years old, so things looked really good. And I found myself in some cases like actually just kind of running around enemies so I could get a look at them, because I was so used to seeing that the First Encounter version of these same enemies. A lot of these enemies are the same throughout the entire series. And I almost wanted to take a look at them in this high definition, where it was less of a, hey, I'm going to beat this guy, and more of a like, wow, I really want to look at the textures and the model of this character, because in the First Encounter, they're blocky, somewhat poorly textured creatures, and you really crank up that fidelity in 4. You also see a ton of gameplay and level design changes. I think the level design really starts to hit its stride in Serious Sam 4, in my opinion. I got to this one, it's almost like a reactor core, where you're having enemies dumping into this pit that you're in, but you also have this large enemy up at the top kind of teleporting from location to location. And you've got to find this way to mix between, hey, do I spend my time clearing some of these lesser enemies down on the ground so that I can get a look at him? Or do I just evade these other enemies by running around in a circle and try to just get him as he pops up? And you start to have to make some choices. And I think that type of level design is what was missing in those first games. Like I would have loved to have seen this come in those first games. And that's kind of what you saw, like with its competitors, with the Serious Sam competitors in like Half-Life, Halo, some of those better FPS games, even like Perfect Dark to an extent, you do have that sort of like mission objective and multi-tier design where it's not just like, hey, you just got to shoot through this slog of enemies. And I think that's why this game kind of isn't viewed in the same light as like a Halo, which is kind of considered one of the greatest FPSs of all time. This game falls behind that because it lacked that variety in its level design and its mechanics. Its mechanics are significantly thinner for this game than you have in those other games. So I think realizing that and adding that to Sirius M3 and even more so to Sirius M4, you really start to get that gameplay. And like I mentioned, I wasn't able to play the Sirius M4 base game, but I watched a video of its final boss, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is you now have this like, it's almost like Shadow of the Colossus style bosses. Like if anyone's familiar with that game, if you're not, like check it out. It's a brilliant game in the PS2 era, but the bosses are the levels where basically like these bosses have a scale that you are moving around on the boss. You are jumping from platform to platform, and it might be like a bracelet on the boss's arm or some bracer, or you're like sliding down the boss's horn to get to the head. Like the bosses are these incredibly large beasts that you have to navigate to find their weak spots. And from what I see from the Sirius Sam 4 gameplay footage is that's what that final boss is. You're using this grappling hook to like zoom your way up to its arm, and then you've got to parachute down onto its knee and put a detonator on the knee so that it blows out that leg. And that's the kind of stuff that I would have loved to have seen. Like if that final boss, I mean, we're talking technical advancements here too, so don't get me wrong. Like I understand that some things might not be possible, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you got to think about is layering these mechanics, and you can't just having the player do the same thing over and over and over gets repetitive too quickly in a sense. And so you've got to try to vary it. Even with the technical limitations, you've got to try to find some way to switch this up and keep the players fresh. And that's kind of what I found as I take a look back on the first encounter, having jumped into some of these newer ones a little bit more recent. That's kind of what I find myself wanting is, hey, I really wish first encounter utilized some level of variance to kind of do this. But overall, like super nostalgic games, like me and Marv talked about, like these games just will always remind me of, I mean, I'm dating myself, but the end of high school, sort of like first era of college experience where it's that early 2000s, and they'll always just remind me of that. And for that, they're definitely a nostalgia fill. So I love that Marv chose this game to play through and kind of re-experience because it's been quite a while since I've been able to go through the whole thing. So that is Serious Sam. And I want to thank Marv again for the donation to Extra Life and allowing me to play this game again and get through it and share my experience and share some of my design talk. If you want to sponsor a game yourself with a $100 donation to my Extra Life, you could choose the game that you see this exact same video on. I'll play through it to the best of my ability and give a rundown on mechanics and what I love, didn't love, and all of that. And we'll bring you on if you want to come on and do just what Marv did at the front end of this video and talk about the game and what it means to you. You are welcome on. So join. You'll see links to donations in comments and other stuff. But as always, donate this. I do this for the kids. Like we do this to raise money for Extra Life and for the Children's Miracle Network. And I appreciate Marv and his donation and everyone that's donated so far. So as always, I know we say it every time, but likes, subscribes, all of that help bring my content to you and help other people find my content as well. If you enjoyed it, give the video a like, make a comment down below. Do whatever you need to kind of share this video. I'm happy to have more people join and have these conversations. And if you do comment down below, I try to answer everything that comes across. So I love having that dialogue. I'm trying to build a community around this discussion of game design, discussion of game history. And the only way to do that is comment. Don't sit around and be silent. Like if you have a question or you want to share your thoughts on this game, do it. I want to talk about that. I want to share that nostalgia with you and join in. So as always, thank you everyone for watching. Have a fantastic day, week, month, year.